Thank you for joining us today. We are going to talk about the history of Hanukkah. Um, Both Matthew and I are Christians. We're not Jewish, but we find the holiday very interesting and wanted to learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, and 4 years ago, I posted a Facebook article with a lot of the. We took a lot of notes from that article. I've always been a massive student of history, and maybe more to come on either my channel or the Pantry Pirate channel itself about history stuff in the future. But a lot of it played into part with a lot of stuff went on in the Jewish world. It helps explain some of what Jesus and Jesus' life with the historical setup. It also plays off another part of history I really love, which is the Hellenic Greek history, which is really that time of history after Alexander the Great died and what happened between that and Rome, which is where Hanukkah took place during the Hellenic era. It played a lot of huge part in Jewish culture. Of course, the Sadducees and Pharisees, which you hear about in the New Testament, derived during this period and came about and actually are a product of this world that was set up.
Okay.
So, and kind of if you want to get first in the Hanukkah history, I gotta actually talk about the bad guys first because it helps set the frame what was going on in their world and what was going on in the world at large. So, I think it was roughly 323 BC was when Alexander the Great died. He was 32 years old. He had conquered an empire that stretched from Greece all the way to India.
Wow.
And on his deathbed, he had no clear heir. He had a son that wasn't even born yet, and some distant relatives. And so basically, according to legend, when they asked who should manage his empire, he said, "To the strongest." Well, there was a regent, Perdiccas, his brother Philip IV, who was not, he wasn't mentally capable of being a king, was a king in name. But what happened, the Greeks, in Game of Thrones style, it's very much, the loss of Game of Thrones happened in the world. They tore Alexander's empire apart in what was called the Wars of Diadochi. There's 4 wars. And that's a video for another time. I don't want to dive into that. But effectively, after these wars, Alexander's empire was split. Mostly, there's a few smaller states, but mostly 3 large states. There was one based in Greece called Macedon, and it was ruled by the Antigonid dynasty. What named after was started by Antigonus, who had passed away in the wars of Diadochi. He's one of Alexander's generals. You had the Ptolemaic dynasty, once again another one of Alexander's generals, who ruled basically in Egypt. Now his empire also included Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, what do you call Cyprus today, and parts of Libya. So it was not just Egypt. It had and there were some other territories roughly in what's now Turkey, Greek cities, and some in Greece itself that were under Ptolemy. But Ptolemy, the Ptolemaic Empire's most famous ruler was Cleopatra, who was the last ruler. And you know about Cleopatra, Mark Antony, all that stuff. So right. she was a descendant of Ptolemy, like after 300 years. Then you had the third empire, which mostly based in Asia, and it was the largest. It was called the Seleucid Empire. And it was named after Seleucus, who was a lieutenant in Alexander's army. And he had carved out an empire starting around Babylon, but it basically controlled most of the Middle East. What you now think of the nation of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, even into Afghanistan in that area, going into India. So he had the Asian part of Alexander's empire, which was very far-flung, very difficult to control for future rulers, especially when they got into weak periods. It's the Seleucid Empire that actually is going to drive our story. So after its original founder, Seleucid himself, Seleucid I, and he was the last of the Diadochi, last of Alexander's general that was living. He was in his 80s. He was in the process of invading Greece. He was assassinated. And so after him, it was like, okay, we can't reunite the empire. It was impossible. And by that time, it passed on to their children and their children's children. So over the course of several hundred years, several of his children, his empire went in decline. They'd lost some of their areas of the east. And then there's this strong ruler that came along. His name was Antiochus III. And he began to rebuild the Seleucid Empire. He took back Bactria, which was Afghanistan back then. He took back Parthia, which was kind of like in that Uzbekistan, Iran area. and he built up this big army, and he was about ready. He was growing, and then he fought what's called the Fifth Syrian War. And what was monumental about that is he defeated the Ptolemaics, Egypt, and that's when Israel, along with Lebanon, what they call Fidensia at the time, and some of the other states around like Jordan, they passed from the Ptolemaic rule to Seleucid rule. So they went from one empire to another. And a lot of this is talked about in Daniel chapter 10 and 11. They refer to a kingdom of the north, and I did this big Bible study on it one time. And the king of the north, it makes sense from the perspective of Israel, because
Hey, something else from the Game of Thrones, the King of the North.
yeah, there you go. Good point. But and sorry, it's just really nerdy. But I got to get the backstory through. So the king, they had the Seleucid dynasty ruled out of the city of Antioch, which was named after Seleucid's son Antiochus, and so they ruled from the north. Antioch's north of Israel, Syria's north of Israel. The Ptolemaic dynasty was based in Alexandria in Egypt, and they're south of Israel. So king of the north, Seleucids; king of the south, the Ptolemies, because they're north and south of Israel. It's from the perspective of the Jewish people.
Right.
Then there's also a group called the Sea People, which will be the Romans, because they come by boat to interfere. And at this time in history, to kind of put a phrase when Antiochus III lived, he hired Hannibal after Hannibal had fled Carthage as one of his generals, which of course made Rome angry. So he was building up. He defeated Egypt, defeated a bunch of people. Meanwhile, the Macedon, that other state I was talking about, Macedon, was in decline. They had a leader called Philip V, and he got cocky. He sided with Hannibal in the Second Punic War. So all this stuff happened right after Second Punic War, after Hannibal and Rome, that we read about in history. And he wasn't very successful against Rome. He barely did anything to impact the war. And they call that the First Macedonian War. That's what the Romans called it. Then they had what's called the Second Macedonian War, which is Rome getting angry at Philip and getting revenge after they'd finished off Carthage. And so the Romans had entered Greece after this. Is the Second Macedonian War ended. Rome set up a permanent garrison in Greece, but they mostly left Greece alone. And they freed a bunch of the Greek city-states and said they declared freedom of the Greeks. Well, some of the Greek city-states got worried. One of them is particularly called the Aetolian League, which was at this time in history, the Greeks were starting to form. One city-state could not fight these big powers like Rome and Macedon, so he started forming leagues, and one of them was called the Aetolian League. They were weary of Rome's growing power in Greece, so they reached out to Antiochus III and said, hey, come help us, come liberate Greece. And he used that as a pretext to come in and invade. Well, a lot of the other Greek nations didn't like that, so they allied with Rome. Even Macedon did. And there was what's called the Roman-Syrian War. And there were two major battles, one at Thermopylae, which was at the same Thermopylae Sparta fought Persia in.
Oh, wow.
So they fought there, and the Romans defeated, and the Greek allies defeated the Seleucid side.
Hopefully they had more than 300 warriors that time.
Well, that was one of the problem is he only took a token force, Antiochus III, into Greece, and he didn't take his full army, thinking the Greeks would rise up and join him, which didn't happen at all. And he ended up fighting Rhodes, who was a major power at the time, Pergamum, Macedon, and Rome. All four of them allied against him. And I think the Achaean League later joined another league based in what's called Achaea. It's an area of Greece today.
Okay.
And so they all basically ended up beating him in Greece. He got ran out of Greece. Then they attacked him in Turkey. And there's what's called the Battle of Magnesia. And this was led by the Romans. And the Romans defeated him. And it was kind of a blowout. Rome was all worried because the Seleucid Empire was like the biggest, and they thought, they could raise a massive army and stop us. Well, they defeated them pretty easily, which shows that this state had grown kind of corrupt and weak over time. And so after that war, part of the treaty is that all the lands that were in Turkey that were part of the Seleucid Empire went to Pergamum and Rhodes to be ruled. And that hurt the Seleucid Empire because Turkey at that time had a lot of Greeks in it. That's why, when Paul traveled around, he wrote to the Greeks at Antioch of Pisidia, to the Greeks at Iconium and stuff. Well, the Seleucid Empire and the Hellenic empires at that time relied a lot on Greek citizens to man their hoplite, the main core of their military.
Okay.
So by losing the manpower and plus all the wealth of their areas that were now in Turkey, that was almost like a permanent blow blow to the Seleucid Empire. It was now mostly limited to Persia and
Gotcha.
Iraq and all that stuff. So they started this decline, and of course, Antiochus III, he was actually friendly to the Jews. I will say that. He let the Jews worship when he took over Israel. He kind of left them alone. Then there was it passed to, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. It's here in my notes. He's not in your cliff notes.
While you're looking at that, do you want a little bit of Manischewitz wine to celebrate the occasion?
Sure. Ah, gosh. I'm trying to remember. Okay, it's Seleucus the Fourth. So you had Seleucus the First. It's the fourth. He was the first son of Antiochus III to take over. He only ruled for, I think, 9 months before his brother Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who's going to be the main character, main villain in the story, had him executed and took over the throne. But Seleucus IV did something unique in that he was the first one to seize treasure from the temple in Jerusalem to help pay off the war debt. So that's when they started first messing with the Jews. Now, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and I'm going to probably go to the Jewish history next before I jump too much into him, but he is the main villain of the Hanukkah story. He is thought to be one of the prophesied persecutor of Jews in the book of Daniel.
Okay.
And he would basically, in Jewish culture, be the worst offender of Jewish people until probably Adolf Hitler. He would do a lot of nasty stuff. So we'll get to him in a minute. And he doesn't start out that way either. He starts out kind of leaving them alone. And I'll go on this little piece of it. So, and this is believed to be talked about in Daniel 10 specifically. So when he took over, he didn't first go after Jews. He actually went to war with Egypt. And the Ptolemaic Egypt had gotten so weak that he was going to basically be able to walk in and take them over. And maybe that would have sorry guys, I've been kind of down in the weather. Maybe that would rejuvenate his empire. Well, he was crossing the Sinai Peninsula, and this Roman envoy shows up and famously draws a line in the sand, takes a stick and draws a line in the sand, says, if you step over this line, we're going to war with you. And Antiochus IV basically had to turn around and leave Egypt, leave his campaign. And he kind of threw a hissy fit on the way back, and that's when he attacked the temple in Jerusalem. He was nasty. He put a statue of Zeus, told all the Jews they need to bow and worship Zeus. He started killing priesthood. A lot of stuff. There are a lot of terrible things. He started persecuting, nastiness of the women, all this stuff.
Right, and that's what caused the Maccabees to finally want to revolt.
Yes. Which I'll get to the Jewish part now. I've kind of talked about. So that's what's kind of going on in the Hellenic world, and you can see how all this stuff is built up. Where you got these Greek dynasties, the remnants of Alexander's empire fighting each other. How you got a failing empire that's, even though still massive and strong, is kind of in decline, and Rome's on the rise, and you got Antiochus IV in his hissy fit, where he's going to take out a lot of his frustration, a lot of his anger on the Jewish people. And this is, like I said, I think a lot of this is referenced in Daniel chapter 11, in 10 and 11, if you want to read about it. If you think of it like the king of the north being, and this is what I taught in the Bible, so it was this Seleucid empire, sometimes called the Syrian empire, and the king of the south being the Ptolemaic or the Egyptian Greek world.
Okay. Cheers, man.
Cheers. So kind of going into Jewish history, and this will be more familiar probably than the Greek side of the history. As, of course, you see in the Bible, the Jews were united by Saul, then David, then Solomon. Those are the kings.
Right.
After Solomon, the empire was split. You had Solomon's son Rehoboam, who I think two and a half of the tribes follow. And then there was Jeroboam, who was kind of like the rebellious one. And he founded the northern kingdom of Israel. And so that split was basically permanent. Israel went on. You follow the book of Kings. North and the South Kingdom. North Kingdom was destroyed by an ancient empire called the Assyrians. The South Kingdom was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. They were taken off to Babylon captivity. Then Babylon fell to Persia and Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus the Great and some of his successors allowed the Jews to return home, rebuild the temple, And it's kind of interesting. I always found you see in a lot of our history, Persia is depicted as the bad guy. Oh, they're the ones the Greeks fought and stuff. In the Bible, they're kind of depicted as one of the more favorable empires.
Right.
They're the ones that allowed the Jews to return home. Interestingly, the Book of Esther, she's married. She marries the Persian king. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
That's the same Persian king Xerxes that invades Greece.
Oh really?
So if you're watching
Same
the movie
one.
300, that's Esther's husband.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I just thought Xerxes was a common name, kind of like, there's like multiple Caesars in Rome. I kind of thought there was like Xerxes the first and the second and the third.
It was, but the particular one that so Darius was his dad who invaded Athens. That was the Battle of Marathon, and where we get the Marathon from. And then you had Xerxes, the one that did the full invasion of Greece. He was also kind of trying to get revenge for his dad losing, but he was the same king.
Oh wow!
Per the Bible that Esther would have interacted with.
I didn't realize that.
So,
and interactive being an interesting word.
Yeah, there you go. I guess. Yeah, but so I mean, one person's villain is another person's hero, but
Right.
the Persians were never oppressive at all to the Jewish people. In fact, they worship a religion called Zoroastrianism, which is very, very similar to Judaism. It believes you believe it has a work system where if you do good, you go to a place like heaven. If you do bad, you go to a place like hell. And they believed in one God. So very, very similar to the ancient Persian religion. Zoroastrianism would have been very similar to Judaism.
So if you're gonna have to be conquered by somebody, maybe Persia's not so bad.
Yeah. And of course, Persia gets conquered by Alexander, and that's where we get into the story of that. But they were allowed to return and rebuild the temple. And then, basically, leading up to this is more kind of in general with the Maccabees, but kind of going on. You get two factions emerge in Israel, and you'll see during the revolt, these factions will start to grow, even though the Jews start winning and eventually get their independence. And they're very much prominent in the Bible, in the New Testament. And they are the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The best way to think of the Sadducees, they were Hellenized Jews. They mixed Greek religion with Judaism. And they usually, so they were kind of impacted by the Seleucids or whoever ruled them. They would, close to I compare them, if I would compare them U.S. politics, they'd become like the liberals. While the Pharisees would be the staunch conservatives.
Okay.
The Pharisees were all about, and Pharisees kind of, and they deservedly so, get a bad rap in the Bible, but kind of keeping cognizant the Jewish mindset. They were destroyed for disobeying God. So you have a group that's now like almost the extreme. We got to obey the laws of God because we don't want the Babylonian captivity to happen again.
Right.
So they're kind of almost totally to the extreme, to the point where there's no love, there's no godliness in their action anymore. But they're so obsessed with the Mosaic Law.
Following the laws, nothing else.
So yeah, so you got that kind of interesting thing. So you got Antiochus the Fourth. Like I said, he didn't start out persecuting Jews. On his return, specifically from that showdown he had with Rome, where he had to back down.
To be fair though, when you say Mosaic law, there were a lot more than just 10 laws at that point.
Oh yeah.
I think if they'd stuck to the 10 Commandments, there could have been a lot more room for interpretation and compassion versus being so legalistic at that point.
Well, it's a lesson for us. You could probably see some conservatives in our country, specifically Christians, that get kind of heartless and get focused too much on the law.
Yeah.
So you can learn a lot from these stories. I mean, people don't change.
Absolutely. Human nature is the same as it was back then.
Yeah. And you got the two extremes. You got the leftist who don't take the laws seriously enough, and you got the rightist who are too extreme on the law. So you get...
For sure.
Maybe there's somewhere in the middle where it should have been.
Just like back then, a centrist perspective may be the best one. Didn't know we'd get political in this, but I totally agree.
So, basically, here's what Antiochus IV did. Basic cliff notes. Ordered the Jews to worship Zeus. He was determined and vowed to make, not just the Jewish people, but all the people in his realm, to make them Greek. You're going to have the Greek language, you're going to have the Greek religion, you're going to become Greek. He desecrated the temple, put a statue of Zeus in the holiest of holies. That's the central area where the Ark of Covenant was. Right. And told all the Jewish priests, if you had to worship this. He massacred Jews who refused to comply. If Jews did not follow the Hellenic law, you would get killed for it.
Side note: I wonder who he got to put that statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies. Like, if I don't know if you approach the Ark, that's dangerous territory. I wonder if he would like forced priests to do it, or who knows.
Who knows? I think it was. There is, interestingly, in the Bible, and it happened. What was it? People were able to carry off the Ark of the Covenant that didn't believe in it, and so it seemed like it was more like harsher on the Jewish people than non-Jewish. Interestingly, and then and there's another desecration of the temple that comes after Antiochus IV. You had Pompey Caesar, or not Caesar, but Pompey. He was a contemporary of Caesar. He was a Roman general. He did it. He didn't. Now he didn't. He walked into it. That was his desecration. He didn't put statues or try to enforce anything, but he did walk into the Holiest of Holies when he took Israel. They built a military fortress in Jerusalem, and then of course these actions started widespread revolt. He's telling the Jews, you cannot be. Basically, he's telling them you cannot be Jewish anymore. You got to be Greek. And so it was kind of a prominent family. Specifically, he was a priest named Matthias. And Matthias started a revolt. And then he was killed by Greek officials who were trying to enforce the laws of Antiochus IV. It was actually his son, Judas, who was called the Maccabee. And Maccabee just stands for the hammer. It's a Jewish word for the hammer. It was a son of Matthias, Judas, who started the revolt, angry over what happened to his dad. And so his dad was kind of loosely started, I would say more like a pacifist revolt. And Judas actually started the civil revolt. And basically the Jews started a religious war, a guerrilla war. They would run from the Greek authorities. They would come back and destroyed idols, attacked supply lines, hit and run tactics. So whenever Greeks were just march around the countryside, bam, here comes the Maccabees. Or if the Greeks are not prominent in a city, but they got one of their Greek temples, they'd go into the city and destroy the temple.
So it's pretty typical guerrilla tactics.
Correct. So it starts out small. They start out very small. They're only in their little area of Judea, but as they start winning, they start getting more notoriety. More and more people gravitate towards them. And then they started winning some victories. I put 3 of the battles: Nahal el Haraman, Beth Horon, and Emis. And eventually, I think after the last battle, Emis, they had effectively started to run the Greeks totally out of Judea. The initial garrisons or whatever. And so they enter Jerusalem. They eventually retake Jerusalem. They reclaim the temple. And this is where the Hanukkah miracle comes into play. When they entered the temple, it was, of course, ransacked them. They restored the minaret, the candle. You know, you've seen the candles that always light up on Hanukkah.
Uh-huh.
That was part of that. If you keep up in the Old Testament, this even talk about that candle was always supposed to stay lit. It sat in the Holy of Holies. It was always supposed to stay lit, among other things that were in the Holy of Holies. They restore it, but they light it up. But they only found enough oil for one day. They didn't have enough oil to keep it lit.
Right.
Well, according to the miracle, the minaret stayed lit for 8 full days before they could get the new oil. And that is actually the Hanukkah miracle. That's what they're celebrating. Well, it represents the retaking the temple, the restoration of the Jewish faith from this hostile aggressor, occupier.
Right.
But the specific miracle they're celebrating is, we didn't have enough oil to keep this candle, but yet it stayed lit.
Somehow God provided.
Yeah, and there's a lot more. There's a lot of miracles. Sadly, the Protestant Bible doesn't have it. I'd be curious to read because it's in the Catholic Bible, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and they get into this because there's supposedly a Jewish prophet that prophesied Antiochus IV death, and he died exactly how the prophecy talked about. So, effectively, by 142 BC, the Jews get their independence. So there was some back and forth. The Seleucids sent more troops in. The Maccabees actually had to flee Jerusalem after all this happened on one occasion. But they slowly defeat them again, get back into the region, and they start to wear them out supply-wise. Another challenge for the Seleucid Empire is there was another rising threat in the east called Parthia that was starting to take over effectively what's now Iran. Of course, Parthia would eventually go on and take over Iran and Iraq, and they become a rival of Rome. And the Rome and Parthia fought a lot. But their military forces got diverted, having to fight Parthia and other enemies to the east, they could put less and less energy on the Jews, and eventually they decided it just wasn't worth it. And this was after Antiochus IV died. He died per this prophecy, so they're like, okay, they're just not worth it anymore. Plus having them as an independent puts kind of a buffer between Egypt and the Seleucids.
Makes sense.
So they decide by 142 BC, 146 BC, they sign a treaty. The Jewish nation is actually a nation again. The first time since before the Babylonian captivity, the Jewish rule their own homeland. And sadly, it would be the last time they would rule it. It'd be eventually conquered by Rome. They wouldn't rule, they have a Jewish state again until 1947.
Wow. Till post World War II.
Yeah. So, and basically, that is the Hanukkah story. Is this the minaret staying burned, but it represents the effort about the Jewish people keeping their faith in God, keeping their beliefs in a time when it was not popular to keep their beliefs, and a lot of the rest of the Middle Eastern world did become Greek. That's why when the Romans ruled that area, Paul's traveling around. He's talking about everybody speaking Greek. They had Greek culture. They had Greek language. The military tactics were Greek. Everything was Greek. And the Romans kind of restored it. Helped the Romans rule better, too. So even when Rome ruled it, it was mostly Greek. And that would retain. But the Jewish people stood out because they never gave in.
That's really cool that they still kept the faith and kept strong.
It kind of to talk about what happened. I did put this in the end. Is a few things about like one of the Zedekiah. Now, in my article, went very into detail about these different events, the revolts, the different battles. The different generals like Gorgias and Nicanor who came back as armies. They were actually the ones defeated at Emmaus. That was a relief army that came from Greece. That's after they took Jerusalem, because they wiped out that relief army. But basically, kind of to talk about what happened to the Jews after. So basically, the Jews were independent from 142 BC to 40 BC. It was called the Kingdom of Judah, or Judea. And it roughly ruled Judea, Idumea, and Samaria. And they were ended by the Roman general Pompey, who also ironically ended the Seleucid Empire as well. So the Seleucid Empire disappeared right before the Kingdom of Judah did. So both empires died at the same time. The Seleucids, of course, as I said, they went in decline. They lost. Of course, Afghanistan became the Greek Bactrian kingdom, broke away, and interesting enough, founded a Greek kingdom in India that was around longer than even after the death of Christ. But they lost Iran and eventually Iraq and Babylon to the Parthians, a group of nomadic horsemen who took over the Greek province of Parthia, and they called themselves Parthians. They're really called Barney. The region of what's now Syria, the nation of Syria, was what was all that was left of their empire after that. And the only reason it was left alone was because you had Parthia over here, Rome over here, and Armenia up here. It was kind of a nice buffer state between those three powers. Eventually, and they constantly fought civil wars. They could not agree on who should be the king or whatnot. They were at one point taken over by Armenia, and then they left. And then eventually, Rome got concerned about how unstable they were, and the Roman general Pompey marched into Antioch and basically ended the Seleucid Empire. He then, of course, marched into Israel and ended the Jewish kingdom as well, and that's when Israel became under Roman rule. Now, interestingly, Hanukkah was celebrated even in Jesus' time, and it's recorded that he actually celebrated Hanukkah in John chapter 10, verses 22 and 23, which it was called by a different term. I think it was called the Festival of Remembrance or Festival of the Tabernacle, I believe. I think you have it.
It depends. I've got the New Living Translation, and it actually does straight up call it Hanukkah.
Dedication. Festival of Dedication. So we know that even at the time of Jesus, it was actually a festival that was celebrated by the Jewish people.
There it is, right there.
Yeah.
It was now winter, and Jesus was in Jerusalem at the time of Hanukkah, the Festival of Dedication. So I went by both names. But yeah. That's really cool. That lends credence to the historical significance of Hanukkah, the fact that Jesus himself celebrated it. Oh, they had a little bit of turmoil during celebration of it.
Yeah, yeah. And
Jewish, so yeah, Jewish leaders confronted him at Solomon's portico at the temple, and basically told him, "If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." And he said, "His works testify who he is. His followers recognize his voice, and he and his Father are one." So then they tried to stone him to death.
But kind of going back to the story. What I find cool about the story of Hanukkah, it's very, in a lot of ways, it's very American because it's a nation, a people struggling against an oppressive regime, like we did with the British Empire,
For sure.
for their independence, for the ability to worship the way they want to, for them to have their own sovereignty. And some things never change, but I mean, it's something that I'm surprised. It is interesting how very little people know about it. I mean, of course, people don't even know what the 90% of people probably wouldn't know what the Seleucid Empire even was, right. Even though it's one of the top 25 largest empires in history. They wouldn't know Antiochus IV Epiphanes and how cruel of a man he was in the persecution he did to the Jewish people, which is the persecutor talking about it in Daniel is believed to be him.
Okay.
That's right. So if you get in a lot of the book of Daniel and its prophecies, it starts kind of making some sense. But
yeah, I definitely get, especially the way you explained it, I get a little bit of maybe inferiority complex for him, where he felt like he had to take it out on somebody else.
Yeah. And one thing I forgot to mention this. So when Antiochus III lost to Rome, not only did he lose Turkey, he had this huge war debt he had to pay. He had to pay Rome of a fee. I'm trying to remember the word. It's not tribute, indemnity, reparations. Yeah, and that's why he actually died. Antiochus III died fighting out in Afghanistan in that area, trying to raise money by bullying his eastern lands.
I've got to pay all this. Guess what? You're going to pay it for me.
So that's probably why they went after the Jews. That's one of the reasons they probably went after the Jews is money, the root of all evil.
I know where we can get some gold.
yeah, basically.
Let's go to the temple.
So, and so they were, like I said, an empire in its sunset. Declining power. That basically, I'm going to bully these people because
sure. Try to get back whatever authority they could through cruelty.
Yeah.
Just like Solomon said, nothing new under the sun. People have been doing that since the beginning of history.
Yep. And of course, the Romans also would be cruel to the Jews. There would be several slaughters on that aspect, and persecution of Christians are well known as well in the Roman world, well documented. But
for sure, could go through so many examples. Roman candles, when they used to dip them in wax and light them on fire.
Yeah. Now, one famous TV show in the United States that really got a lot of credit for recognizing Hanukkah was the original cartoon Rugrats, because the family in it, they were Jewish, and so instead of when they did their Christmas special, they did the Hanukkah special. And of course, Angelica wanted to be Pharaoh. They did like Moses instead of. I don't know why they didn't do I guess because they didn't know the history, but it'd been neat if they'd done the Maccabees and the real history. But they did Moses and.
I remember watching that back in the 90s, long time ago.
And Pharaoh totally fit Angelica.
Right.
So.
Maybe they were playing to more well-known history too.
And of course, sadly, I have another. I did this Word document one time where I listed out all the countries who have resided in the land of Israel. It's a lot. Different powers throughout history, different Arab dynasties, the Turks, the Crusaders, the Romans, the Greeks, the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, about anybody you could think of, even the Mongols at one point.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. A group called the Ilkhanate who got almost to Egypt. That was the furthest they got. So it's been so many different nations. Of course, the British ruled it as well. The Ottomans. And then today, of course, right now as we're speaking, there's conflict in that region.
Still ongoing.
So
I feel like no matter what I say about the current conflict, I'm going to offend somebody, so I better not.
Yeah, I don't even want to go there. But yeah, I love Greek history. I think I was earlier talking about like military, and people talk about Sparta and all, and you think of Sparta or Athens, you think of the Greek history, but kind of, I guess, going into overtime, the Macedonian armies were far superior to the Spartan armies. So tactically, what they would do, the Spartans had the famous hoplite Greek phalanx, and all the Greek city-states did that. Sparta just supposedly had stronger. And that's where, if you see, they had the shields and the spears, and they made like the columns. Well, the Macedonians made the shields a little smaller. They gave them swords, and they had these really long spears. They put weights on to balance them. So it's kind of like, while the Spartans would have had 8 to 9 foot long spears, the Macedonian phalanx had 12 to 14 feet long spears, so they could extend further. Wow. But what the Macedonians did too, they put a military unit called the Hypatistes on their flanks, and these were usually swordsmen that also had javelins, and they could function as what's called light infantry skirmishers. That way they could protect the flank, because the risk with hoplites is, because they're slow and mobile, is you can always go around and flank them. The Roman legions were very good at doing that when they eventually went up with the Greeks. Then they would also typically, of course, regular Greek armies did this too, but the Macedonians did it more effectively. They would use skirmisher units also, along with the Hypatistes, which would be like peltists, javelin throwers, slingers, slinging the kind of David and Goliath, and archers, and they would put them along the ranks to cover the infantry as well as provide the flank. Where where Macedon really was effective was what's called the Agema cavalry, or the companion cavalry, the shock heavy cavalry that they would use, which Alexander famously led in battle. He would lead it, and a typical, if you had a phalanx, the typical what they would do, they'd take the phalanx and smack it against your army, hold your army in place. Then the horsemen would come around, hit your army from behind. And as soon as you get hit from behind, you get flanked, your army flees. Worked constantly against Persia. Again, Alexander did this constantly in Persia. He would have the infantry engage. His horsemen would come around, usually covered by the light infantry, just screen, so that they don't get hit by the Persian cavalry. They would come around. They would go right for the head. They'd go for Darius. As soon as the Darius's army saw him turn and run, because he had to save his life from Alexander's cavalry, the whole army would turn and run and flee the battlefield.
Oh, wow.
Next thing you know, Macedon won. So they were masters of controlling the battlefield of this mobility. Then, as they encountered other enemies, they implemented other tactics. They would use war elephants, became very common. They would bring and elephants were very effective against horsemen.
Sure.
Seleucus, the founder of the Seleucid Empire, famously used 500 war elephants at the Battle of Ipsus against Antigonus, and he surrounded Antigonus and his horsemen, and they were able to defeat him that way.
Can you imagine all the food, though, to keep 500 elephants at their fighting strength?
Oh, yeah. Well, keep in mind, you got an army of 50, 60,000, so, yeah. Now, you could defeat the elephant. How they would defeat elephants is interesting. They would, you say, oh, these things are like tanks on the battlefield. They were the tanks of the ancient world.
Probably the original tanks, yeah.
And so how you would fight the elephants is you would have that light infantry, archers, slingers, and skirmishers, target the head of the elephant, throw all their weaponry at the elephant's head. The elephant would panic, throw off its riders, turn, oftentimes run backwards into its own army,
right,
causing havoc. And so that was and to counter that, they started putting armor on elephants' heads, and ramping it up. So, but the Romans got very effective of using their velites. They would actually hit elephants with light infantry like that and cause them to panic.
So basically, it's like a giant wrecking ball. It just depends on whether it hits your enemy or comes back and hits you, like a pendulum effect.
And then the Greeks would also implement the Persian tactics, Eastern cavalry, and actually Eastern warfare was fought like this from basically late antiquity even into the medieval era. And what they relied a lot on was light cavalry, which was horsemen who used bow and arrows, and it was all guerrilla kind of warfare. So what they would do, they would pelt you Usually when you split your army up, they would pelt at you, and it worked very well, especially in Iran, where supply lines. The problem with taking Iran was it's very remote, a lot of desert, supply lines were poor, so keeping your army provisioned and supplied was very difficult, and they would hit your supply lines. They did this to Romans all the time. They would lead the Romans into Iraq and Iran to wear them out and with their light cavalry. So what they do, they would shoot at you. You turn and try to chase them, they're going to run. They'll run away from you. Right. Then they'll draw you into an ambush somewhere else. And so the Greeks would implement that into their military as well. So they started adopting all these tactics from even their opponents. So you would see like a Greek army, you'd have the hoplites, you would have the shock cavalry, you'd have the light infantry, you'd have the light cavalry, you have war elephants, you'd have the scythe chariots, those are the chariots like in Ben-Hur with the spears. So all these different techniques, you have siege equipment and stuff. The Romans did the same thing. Romans used war elephants too.
Wow. Right. So there was a lot to combat just to make it.
Yeah. The tactics back then were just phenomenally strategic. We think about warfare today, but they had a lot of different maneuvers and tactics they did. And Hannibal was a good example. He knew how to use his limited resources to win battles with brilliant maneuvering of men and stuff. That's why he's regarded as one of the greatest generals by the Romans. Of course, Caesar was good at it too, thinking outside the box. And the Romans were often outnumbered, but they preferred having smaller armies because they would rather have well-equipped, well-disciplined over numbers.
For sure. Yeah, that harkens back to at least for me to the art of war, where you don't really direct force for force. You always try to use the advantages of the battlefield and the advantages of the day to make the most impact on your offending army.
And see, even back then, this is like a good example with the Maccabees, but even like with Rome fighting the Parthians or the different eastern areas, they fought, kind of think about like how Taliban fought the U.S. or Vietnam fought the U.S. It wasn't direct fighting. They knew if they fought, Greece or Rome in a full battle, they're going to get their tails kicked. Let's fight them in this asymmetric warfare.
Sure.
And then get them to where they're vulnerable when they're weak and they're, like wear them down. Oh, their provisions are short. They're dehydrated. Then hit them.
For sure. Hit them while they're down.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I do have a board game called Successors. I played it once with Ryan. It actually is, you play like generals in Alexander's army and fight over his empire like the Wars of Diadochi.
Okay.
See, if you're interested more about this, you get the famed Silver Shields, which were like the main hoplite corps that fought with Alexander the Great. They were considered the most elite army at that time in history.
Cool. We should try it out.
So,
how many people can play?
4.
Okay.
Oh no, 5 max.
So yeah, the next time we get a game night together, maybe we could try it out.
So, and I had one also. It's only 2-player. It's actually literally the game can only be played 2-player. No less, no more. It's called Hannibal and Hamilcar, and kind of same thing. It's Punic War. Okay. Same people made it.
Nice.
So,
thank you, man. I know you're a really good student of history. I appreciate you going through all that.
Yeah, we'll have to think of another history topic in the future. I don't know. What's something that's always interested you? I'm just curious.
As far as ancient history or just
any history.
I'd say maybe the bubonic plague is pretty interesting. Just the different aspects of it, what people believe versus like what actually happened. You hear the term like plague rat. Like did the rats on ships really spread it, or where might have it really come from?
What's interesting, it's actually not. There were 2 other plagues that were actually larger than bubonic plague.
Really?
So the first one would be smallpox. That's the one that hit North America. That's actually the worst plague of all time.
Decimated the native population.
Oh yeah. The other one was the Antonian plague, which happened in ancient Rome around. There was also Justinian plague. I think Justinian plague may have been worse as well. One of them was around 200 or 300 AD. The other one was around 500 AD. The 6th century was one of the worst centuries for humanity. There was supposedly crop failures due to a volcano explosion that blotted out the sun. There was the Justinian plague. There was just a list of cataclysmic. I think it was like the year 527 or something. Like list of cataclysmic events over and over and over again. That was one of the worst in human history.
Wow. Yeah, we should go into that sometime.
So, yeah, try to think. Oh yeah, you're asking about Violent Plague. There is a new PC game coming out, Europa Universal 5, and they start out in the 1300s
Oh wow.
in the aftermath of bubonic plague. But yeah, bubonic plague was pretty bad. Actually, the last case, there's been people in the 20th century that had bubonic plague. It's still around.
I've heard of that.
So
Isolated.
it creates those like spots, those black spots under your armpits or something. It looks terrible.
The Black Death.
Ugh. Wonder what time.
It is 4:30. We've been talking for right at an hour.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and of course we kind of explained we did split into two channels. A lot of the sports stuff is going over to the Pigskin Pirate channel, which is Colin, Sawyer, and myself. And so if you kind of go subscribe to both channels, really, you want to be on this one and that one. Or the Pantry Pirate, I consider to be the parent channel, the main one. But part of the reason we just wanted to split the duties in editing, that was mainly the reason we did that. And I've kind of enjoyed that. I'm kind of weird. I kind of like the editing, to be blunt.
It can be fun to learn the ins and outs. Video editing is something that I had wondered about for a long time. And it's kind of fun to learn a program and just get into the different shortcuts and how to produce it the way you want.
The only item it may not be feasible what I want. I feel like sometimes my videos are still off a little bit on the audio. I think a lot of that has to do with the equipment though. It's something. I mean, we're kind of amateurish, and it's something I may, especially on my side, because I don't even have the microphones like Pete has. So it's still kind of very amateurish, but something we're building towards. I'm building towards, but it. Clean up the audio. That seems to be the biggest challenge, and but some of it's how it's coming through too. I've noticed.
I can show you. First of all, I totally agree that I don't think a lot of our viewers are gonna really care if it's slightly off, but I can show you how to nudge the audio slightly forward or slightly back if it is.
Okay.
My issue. So right now we're recording on my iPhone 15 Plus, but originally I used an old GoPro. I think it was a GoPro Hero 5 Black, old school GoPro, but I didn't realize it recorded at a different frame rate than my audio recording did. So when I went to go marry the two in post-production, it would be exactly synced up in the beginning, but then like in an hour plus podcast, it would slowly drift. So if I nudged it one way or the other, it's like some point in the podcast it would be off. But yeah, as long as you use the same device to record audio and video, that part at least should sync up pretty well.
See, because of the way I'm doing it through computer, I'm using a software system called OBS, and the one I had the most challenge with was when I did the Diablo Halloween special.
Right.
On it, the music I could barely even hear, but in the audio it came in blaring. Like my voice, it was almost blaring my voice out. So I had to play around with it, and I actually did 2 different takes of that same video because the screen was off too. And I figured out, honestly, I went into a different version of Diablo, and that's how I fixed it. But I had to scrap original video. There was one me and Sawyer and I did that I scrapped too. Never. I might upload it someday for fun, just to show. It was the video. I messed up the video. I just didn't do something I normally do. But there's been some videos where I've had to reshoot just because it came in so bad.
Bummer. Yeah, some of the higher ends, like PA systems, they can actually record different audio sources on different tracks. So you can like if the music was really low but your voice was loud, you could nudge your voice down and the music up to balance it. But like the system we have right now, it's just one stereo signal, so everything is either up or down.
Sure.
So makes it a little tougher to edit it just the way you want it.
Yeah, and with mine, because I don't have good recording equipment too, it's how I hear it on my end is not how it always comes through, and so I'm having to do a lot of cleanup. Now it's been better than I thought, and then there's been some situations. The most recent football video we did where there was some echo, and that was Sawyer's side. That was not my side, and and he knew it, so we were trying to fix that. So there was sometimes it's not even on my side. It's sometimes coming in through a different, because we're now on my way we're doing our videos. He has mics. He's coming in through his computer, and it's blasted to my computer, and I'm recording it.
Got it.
because we're not all in the same location.
Maybe some feedback between the speakers and the microphone on his side.
Yeah, it was. He wasn't. It was bouncing. It was echoing from his mic.
Gotcha. That happens to me every time I'm in a Teams meeting at work, like in a conference room, and I forget to mute my laptop. There's always like weird feedback.
Well, thank you guys. I hope you learned something today, and happy to plan to be some more future history stuff too. That's one of the other themes I thought about doing, and
For sure.
and some other general topics.
Whether you guys and gals celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, or just enjoy some time off for the holidays, we hope that it's a great one and that you get to spend some good time with your family and your friends.